To order. Bonjour et bienvenue tout le monde.
Hello,
This is a resumption of meeting number 28 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on National Defence, which started on Friday, April the 30th, 2021. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule sous forme
Today's
hybride,
meeting
conformément
is
à
taking
l'ordre de la
place
Chambre
in a
adopté
hybrid
le
form
25
pursuant
janvier
to the order adopted by the House
2021.
on January
Les membres
25,
seront présents en personne
2021.
ou avec l'application
Some members will be
Zoom.
present in person or
délibérations
over
seront
Zoom.
publiées sur le site
Deliberations
web de la
will be
Chambre des
broadcast
communes.
on the House
À
of
titre
Commons
d'information, la
website.
diffusion web
For information
montrera toujours la
purposes,
personne
the
qui
web
parle plutôt que
broadcast will
l'ensemble du comité.
always show the
If
person speaking
interpretation
rather than the
is
entire
lost, would you
committee.
please inform me immediately, and we will ensure that it is properly restored before resuming with the proceedings. Reminding for all members that all comments should be addressed through the chair. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly, and when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to the speaking list, we will continue to do as our practice has been. We are resuming debate on Mr. Bazan's motion. Go ahead, Mr. Bazan.
He's on mute.
Oh,
I got it. I just saw that. It popped up on my screen. So sorry about that. Madam Chair, based upon the presence of Ms. Telford at committee, I withdraw my motion so that we can carry on with hearing from Ms. Telford.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bazan. We still do need unanimous consent to withdraw the motion. Any objections? Okay, motion withdrawn. Okay, so pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February the 9th, 2021, the committee is resuming its study of addressing sexual misconduct issues in the Canadian Armed Forces, including the allegations against former Chief of the Defence Staff, Jonathan Vance. With us today by video conference, Ms. Katie Telford, Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. Welcome, Ms. Telford. I would now invite you to make your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for your important work looking into how to address sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces. Je comprends que vous m'avez invité à cette rencontre
I
pour parler
understand
de ce que
that
je
you
sais sur
invited me to this
l'information
meeting
que
to
l'ombudsman a
talk
soulevée avec
about
le
what
ministre
I know about the
Sajjan
information
à
that
propos
the
de l'ancien
ombudsman has
chef
raised with
d'état-major de la
Minister
Défense,
Sajjan
Jonathan
about
Vance.
former Chief of Defence
Je
Staff,
suis ici pour
Jonathan
fournir un
Vance.
compte rendu
I'm here
clair
to
de
provide a
comment
clear
cette affaire a
account
été
of how this
portée à mon
matter came to my attention
en
as
tant
Chief
que
of
chef de
Staff
cabinet
to
du
the
Premier
Prime
ministre
Minister
et des étapes après
and
que
the
j'ai été mise au
steps
courant.
after I was made aware of it.
So on March 2nd, 2018, I was told by Elder Marques that the then Defense Ombudsman, Gary Walborn, had pulled the Minister of National Defense aside after a meeting and had ended to raise an allegation of personal misconduct against then Chief of Defense Staff Jonathan Vance. Elder told me that Minister Sajjan's Chief of Staff was seeking advice from our office on how to proceed in order to ensure that the allegations were properly addressed. Elder updated me and the clerk of the Privy Council about this conversation immediately, and I was, of course, very concerned. The clerk advised us that PCO, not political staff or politicians, should follow up on the matter. He said that he would engage Janine Sherman, Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet, who is responsible for senior personnel, which includes advising on Governor and Council appointments and handling advice on any complaints made against them. As you have already heard, I was not given the substance or the details of the allegation, and as you have already heard, my office and the minister were not given the substance or the details of the allegation. We did not know what the complaint was about. Regardless, I operated as though it could be serious. As the clerk recommended, PCO was the appropriate body to follow up with the Ombudsman and to provide advice back to the minister on next steps. Through Ms. Sherman, PCO provided advice to Minister Sajjan and his office. Specifically, her advice was for the minister to contact Mr. Walborn and to redirect him to the Privy Council office. The minister did this right away. Elder was engaged with PCO, who had taken carriage of this issue, and I trusted him to ensure that all appropriate steps were being taken by the correct people, and he kept me updated. I was later told that despite repeated attempts by PCO, Mr. Walborn would not provide any information on the allegation and that without any details, they were unable to do anything. I was assured that they would remain engaged and advise us if they were able to obtain any information at all. I was, however, troubled by this result. I understood that Elder was pressing PCO to see if anything else could be done, but the answer was no. I wanted to make sure not only that this didn't get dropped if the complainant wanted to proceed, but that no one was in harm's way. That's why I talked to Elder, who asked the appropriate officials in PCO to ensure that no one's safety was at risk. And I was told that there was no safety issue. Although I remained concerned, there was simply no information at all. Je me suis certainement demandé,
I certainly asked myself, what else could have been done?
Ça me brise le cœur de penser
It
que
breaks my
quiconque
heart to think that anyone, any woman,
n'ait pas seulement eu à faire
not
face à
only
du
had to deal
harcèlement
with
et à des
harassment
comportements
and
inappropriés,
inappropriate
mais n'ont pas eu
behavior,
d'endroit
but
sécuritaire
had no
pour en
safe
parler et
place to
obtenir
talk about it
justice
and get
ou du soutien.
justice or
Je
support.
veux répéter
I want to
qu'on ne peut pas
reiterate
établir de
that
lieu
you
de travail
cannot
sécuritaire
build a
sans avoir
safe
un endroit
workplace without
sécuritaire
having
pour
a
que les
safe
gens puissent
place for
signaler de
people to
l'inconduite.
report misconduct.
C'est pourquoi le travail de
That
ce
is why the
comité
work of
pourrait
this
être
committee
si
could
important.
be so important.
At the time, we were faced with a situation where we were clearly told that this matter should be handled by PCO and that it would have been inappropriate for political staff or politicians to be directly involved. The last thing I wanted to do was to deny agency to the complainant, or to put their privacy or safety at risk, or to compromise an independent process that was supposed to be there to get at the truth. This matter was brought to the attention of the clerk. My office was engaged to ensure the appropriate officials were following up. And our role was to facilitate the minister's office in getting the direction they needed from officials on next steps. Based on the advice we received, that was where our involvement in the matter had to end. Presque exactement 3 ans plus tard,
Almost
en mars
exactly 3 years
2021,
later, in March
on a tous appris ce que
2021,
la
we
plainte
all
était
learned what the complaint
à travers
was
des reportages publics.
through public
C'était la
reports.
première fois que
This was the
j'entendais
first
quelques
time
détails
I
que
had
ce soit
heard
à propos
any
de la plainte
details
de 2018.
about the 2018
Comme
complaint.
vous pouvez vous
As you can
imaginer,
imagine,
j'ai beaucoup réfléchi
I've
à
been
tout
thinking
ça dans
about
les
this
derniers
a
temps.
lot lately.
I've thought about the amazing women of the armed forces, some of whom I am so honored to have spent time with. I've replayed our conversations, and I've thought about what more I could have asked them or what else I could have done to have created a safer space. I've thought about the many actions the government has taken in the last 5 years and realized just how much more there is to do. I have wondered if I could have pushed harder on the advice on implementation of the Deschamps report. Or could I have pushed harder at the stocktake with the Prime Minister that pulled together the leadership of the armed forces and all the leadership of the S&I community to specifically speak about action in regards to gender and inclusion? I have wondered if I could have seen through General Vance's briefing that appeared to show progress on fighting sexual misconduct in the military, including at that stocktake, where when the Prime Minister asked who wanted to start, the General was the first to speak up and seemed to have a plan. I have wondered if I should have further questioned the General when he told me about his commitment to Me Too, not long after this movement and awakening began. When he told me how frustrated he was that orders were not enough to bring about change. When he told me it was personal for him too. Above all, though, I have thought about the brave women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces who face unthinkable and unacceptable harassment and sexual misconduct in the line of duty. Il est clair que le système actuel ne fonctionne pas
It
et
is
qu'il doit
clear that the
changer.
current system is not
Il est
working
clair
and it
qu'il y a
needs to
encore beaucoup de
change.
travail
It's
à
clear
faire
that there's
pour
still a
s'assurer que
lot
les
of work to be
survivants
done
et
to
survivantes
ensure that
puissent
survivors
s'exprimer et
can
obtenir
speak
le
out
soutien
and get
dont
the
ils ont
support
besoin.
they need,
Et pour s'assurer que les
and
enquêtes
to
appropriées
ensure that
puissent être
appropriate
réalisées.
investigations can be conducted.
The measures we have taken since being in government, they have not gone far enough, nor have they moved fast enough. That's why we recently announced new funding to work to eliminate sexual misconduct and gender-based violence in the Canadian Armed Forces. Why we're moving forward to implement new external oversight mechanisms to bring greater independence to the process of reporting and adjudicating sexual misconduct within the military. The bottom line is this: women and men in uniform must have a system that works and that they can trust. And until we get there, I will not stop pushing to make that happen. Être féministe n'est pas nécessairement inscrit dans la description
Being
de
a
tâches
feminist is
officielles
not
d'un chef de
necessarily part of
cabinet,
the official
mais je
job
crois que ça
description
devrait en
of a
faire
chief of
partie.
staff, but I believe
Et
it
avec le
should be.
soutien du Premier
And with the
ministre,
support of the Prime
j'en ai fait un
Minister,
élément
I've made it
essentiel
an
de
essential
mon travail.
part of my job.
C'est pourquoi j'ai
That's
dédié
why
tant d'énergie
I've put
sans
so
compter
much
les heures,
energy and
tout comme je
time
l'ai fait
into
pour
it,
tant d'autres
just as
accomplissements
I've
de ce
done with so
gouvernement.
many other accomplishments
Dans
of
les
this
5
government.
dernières années, on
In
a
the last
investi
5
dans les
years,
refuges
we've
et des
invested in
services pour les femmes
shelters
qui
and
fuient les abus.
services for
On a mis
women
sur
fleeing
pied une
abuse.
stratégie
We've
nationale pour mettre
created
fin
a
à la
national
violence
strategy
fondée sur
to
le
end
sexe. On
gender-based
a nommé une
violence. We
ambassadrice du
appointed
Canada pour les
a
femmes,
Canadian
la paix et la
ambassador for women,
sécurité.
peace and
On
security.
a investi
We
des millions
invested
de
millions
dollars
of
pour
dollars
passer en revue
to
des dizaines de
review
milliers de
the
cas
tens of
d'agression
thousands of
qui avaient
assault
été
cases that
abandonnés
had been
parce qu'ils étaient
dropped
qualifiés d'être
as
sans fondement.
unfounded.
Il s'agit d'un autre
This is
exemple de
another
l'enjeu à
example of
propos
an
duquel
issue
on a
about
appris
which
beaucoup
much has been
grâce aux
learned through
importants reportages
extensive public
publics.
reporting.
In our own offices, we have brought in systems and processes to protect staff for the first time, systems that I hope allow people to come forward, and some already have, to get the support they need and that take allegations seriously. And there is much more that has been worked on and still much more to do. But let me conclude by saying this. I am a feminist. And yes, I believe the time's up. And these are not only words or slogans or about a brand for me. This certainly is not about partisanship. This is about why I get up in the morning to do the work that I do, the core of who I am and what I fight for. I will never stand down on my advocacy or shrink from giving the best advice I can with the information I have. It is unacceptable that women and men in uniform do not have confidence in the institutions that they are a part of. And that's because the system for far too long has allowed perpetrators to hide in HR processes while denying survivors the support that they need. There is no silver bullet here. What the Me Too movement is uncovering and discovering is sometimes messy and complicated because systemic discrimination is entrenched. And as we work to fix it, we won't always be right. It is exhausting and emotional work, triggering for many, including, I'm sure, many of you. It's personal and professional, and it's work that must be done. I was at breakfast with General Whitecross a few years ago, and I remember her saying to me that if the Prime Minister and I were serious about making life better for women, we had to be ready to put everything on the table. That is what we have always tried to do, and what we will continue to do. But if I may take this opportunity to say to General Whitecross and all the other incredible women and men who have served and who continue to serve our country in the armed forces, I know there is even more we can do and we must do. And I am recommitting to doing everything I can to assist with that. Chair, I would encourage all members to focus on clarifying with me now the facts on what was known and not known, and what could be done and could not be done 3 years ago, so that we can all move forward on the extremely significant and challenging work ahead. We owe that much to the survivors. Je suis maintenant heureuse de répondre
I would now
à
be
vos
happy
questions.
to answer your questions.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Telford. I will now open the floor for questions. First up is Mr. Bazan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Telford, for appearing today. As you know, there's been a lot of talk about this. Both Mr. Warnock and Mr. Marques have testified saying that they understood this was a sexual misconduct allegation, and even official documentation from PCO and PMO said that it was sexual harassment. So my question to you is, who made the decision not to inform the Prime Minister about these allegations?
I would just like to start by pointing out that actually in the testimony of Mr. Marques, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Sherman, they all spoke about how they did not know the nature of the complaint. They had no details of the complaint. They had no, they did not know what the complaint was. And I'll just remind you of what I did and what I'm aware of, and I can tell you
Who
what I
made
did
the
do.
decision not to tell the Prime Minister?
What happened, Madam Chair, was that the minister sought advice on how to deal with this unusual circumstance through his office to my office. and I sought the appropriate advice and the appropriate person to give him that advice. And in this case, that was the Privy Council office.
So you made the decision to keep this away from the Prime Minister, even while this was going on through March of 2018. Yes or no?
No, I'll tell you what happened in early March of 2018. The minister, through his office, contacted my office to seek advice, and we sought the appropriate advice from the Privy Council office. The clerk of the Privy Council at the time said the appropriate people to follow up was his office. And actually, as you heard from Ms. Sherman and from the clerk, I believe and from Mr. Marques, the first steps they took was to assist the minister and to recommend to the minister that he redirect the ombudsperson to the Privy Council office.
So you knew there's allegations against General Vance, and so only one of three options is true. One, you made a decision not to tell the Prime Minister. Two, the clerk of the Privy Council made the decision not to tell the Prime Minister. You two both tell the Prime Minister everything every day on multiple occasions. Or is it number three, that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has told you and put out an edict that not to make him aware of personal misconduct issues of anyone who are Order and Council appointees? Which one is it?
It's none of those, Madam Chair. It is that the minister contacted our office to get advice on how to deal with this unusual circumstance that he'd been faced with. He contacted us immediately. We immediately followed up. We immediately took it seriously. And we, because of the potential of what it could be, we didn't know what it was. So we took the appropriate step to figure out who the appropriate people were to talk to and to follow up.
To nothing. You guys took no steps and didn't protect the complainant here, and you left General Vance in position. So who did you conclude with or instruct to not tell the Prime Minister about these allegations? Was it Michael Warnick? Was it Elder Marques? Was it Minister Sajjan? Who did you conclude with to keep our Prime Minister in the dark?
Actually, the first concern was about the complainant, and that's why it was really important, Madam Chair, that we think about who the appropriate person was to do the follow-up in this unusual circumstance. And the appropriate people were not politicians and political staff. It was the Privy Council office, who handles, as I believe Ms. Sherman talked to you about, the Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet, who handles Governor and Council appointments on any number of things, including issues around discipline.
So we're talking here about personal misconduct, sexual misconduct. Now, these issues need to be dealt with. They're personnel issues. These are Order and Council appointments. They fall under your portfolio and your purview and your advice that you give to the Prime Minister. So are there any other personal misconduct issues that you decided not to inform Justin Trudeau about? Yes or no? Is it once? Is it 5? Is it 10 times that this has happened that you've kept him in the dark on issues of personal misconduct?
I want to remind you about what we knew and didn't know in March 2018. All we knew was that the ombudsperson, as I said in my opening statement, at the end of the meeting, pulled the minister aside and suggested he had a complaint and an envelope, as I understand it. And the minister immediately sought advice and wanted to ensure the appropriate next steps were followed. And that's what we did. You seem confused on it, so I wanted to clarify.
You guys dropped the ball is what's happened here. Now let's, this personal misconduct issue that you didn't follow up on. Now, on what day did you inform Justin Trudeau about the allegations against Admiral Art MacDonald as Chief of Defence Staff? What date did that happen?
I'll remind you what my role was in this, Madam Chair. My role in this was that I was informed of what was happening, and I wanted to ensure the appropriate steps were being followed immediately, that it was being taken seriously because we didn't know what it was, and to ensure that it was the appropriate people following up. And we were doing all of this to ensure that the complainant was being protected.
When did you tell the Prime Minister that Admiral Art MacDonald stepped aside because of allegations against him?
I'm not sure how that is relevant here.
Well, this is part of our study as well, and we're doing sexual allegations against chiefs of defense staffs, plural, and we have Art MacDonald and we have Jonathan Vance, and in both cases, there seems to have been different avenues taken on this. One, because it got reported to the media, you guys react. One is that you guys covered it up because nobody else knew about it, which is true.
No. So, Madam Chair, I want to remind you what we knew in March 2018. We knew of the existence of a complaint from the ombudsperson that the that he
Well, you just
passed
testified
on.
that you had many conversations with Michael Warnick and Elder Marques. Both Michael Warnick and Elder Marques at committee have said that they understood this was a sexual misconduct and sexual harassment issue. So
All
in
right,
those conversations,
I've let you
how many
go
times
over
did you actually?
time, Mr. Bazan. We're already at 6.5 minutes. So I tried to let it go to finish this, but we're not going to get everyone a turn if we do that. So I'm afraid it'll have to go on to Mr. Baker, please.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And Ms. Telford, I'd like to thank you for being here today to answer the committee's questions. And I want to make sure that we all understand what happened here. In your opening statement, you addressed the fact that the minister's chief of staff called your office seeking advice on behalf of the minister. Would you say that that's a normal thing that happens over the course of a workday?
Yes, it is very normal for chiefs of staff to ministers, to all ministers to call, whether it's me, to call my office, to call any member of the broader senior staff on any number of issues, to seek advice on and to think about, to coordinate depending on what the issue is, what next steps could be. We each have different experiences and we try to share them with each other, and it's all to just keep improving at doing our jobs.
Yeah, sure, of course. You've told this committee that the Prime Minister's senior advisor then sought this advice from the clerk of the Privy Council. Is my understanding of your statement correct?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
Mr. Marques Elder was working with both the clerk, as I understand it, and the clerk put him in touch with the Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet, saying she was the best place to help do the follow-up on this. And actually she took the lead on the follow-up because he determined and she determined it was appropriate for the Privy Council office to be doing this follow-up, which is why they advised the minister in his office to redirect the ombudsperson to the Privy Council office.
Okay. And you've just spoken to this a little bit, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. You've also stated, and as we've heard from current and former senior public servants of this committee, that Privy Council office was the appropriate authority institution, particularly the Deputy Secretary to Cabinet, to look into this issue, meaning not only to provide advice to the minister, but to do the active follow-up with the ombudsman. Is that your recollection?
Yes. And I think that can be seen through the documents that have been made public as well, is that the Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet followed up and suggested to the minister that the ombudsperson be redirected to her. And as she has testified before committee, she then engaged with the ombudsperson's office from there.
Okay, thank you. Something really struck me in your opening statement today. You said that you were advised that this matter should be handled by Privy Council office, and that later you were told that Privy Council office was unable to get further information to facilitate their work in this matter. Based on the advice you received, was this where the involvement of you and your office ceased?
Yes, other than what I mentioned in my opening statement, which is when we initially, when Elder was giving me updates and saying there was nothing further that they could find out, and therefore nothing that they could advise or act on any further. I talked to Elder about, we both discussed if there was any way we could get assurance that this was not a safety issue. And then actually we got that confirmation.
Okay, thank you. At this committee, we've heard about an allegation in 2018, and we've also discussed what has since become public 3 years later. Is it correct to say you didn't know details at the time in 2018, and in fact, you only know them now because they have been reported publicly in the past few months?
Completely correct. I had the last number of months, as there were different articles and a lot of people insinuating which one was or wasn't the complaint that had come forward. It wasn't until a March news story where it was specifically reported that it was the complaint that the ombudsperson was referring to. That was the very first time I knew anything at all about the complaint.
Okay, thank you. You have testified here that the current system isn't working, that change is needed. And that's something that we have heard at this committee over and over again. Is it accurate to say that beyond the work the government has done further steps are now being taken.
Yes. And I think it would also be fair to say that many more steps will still need to be taken. Many steps were taken in the first 4 years, but as I said in my opening statement, the first 4 years of this government, and following the launch of Operation Honor. But as I said in the opening statement, as you've heard from the Prime Minister and from the Minister, and I'm sure members of this committee and others who've testified, obviously, there is so much more to do. It didn't go far enough. It hasn't moved fast enough. And that's what we all need to be focused on now.
Okay, thank you. Have you ever refused to appear before this committee?
No, I haven't. I understand that you were discussing an invitation, and I would have accepted earlier this week, except that I didn't want it connected in any way, shape, or form to the Opposition Day motion that was going on earlier this week. So I was glad to accept this invitation following the vote on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you for that. We have heard a lot from Conservatives on this matter, but in my view, they seem to be ignoring history. Is it your understanding that the process that was followed here when an allegation was brought forward was the same as the process used under the previous Conservative government, specifically when a rumor was brought to the attention of Mr. O'Toole, who was then Minister of Veterans Affairs?
Yes, I mean, to the extent that they, as I understand it through testimony before this committee, which is how I have learned about these things as well, they went to the Privy Council office, and I believe in that case to through the National Security Advisor, because he was chairing their selection process of the next Chief of Defence Staff at the time. So that made sense at that time. And so, yes, they did, I believe, the same thing that we did, which is a report to the appropriate officials. A significant distinction, I would say, though, is in the content of the information or the extent of the information. We didn't even have a rumor to go on in this situation. I think there are ways to act and follow up on rumors. We knew that there was a complaint, period.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. On to Monsieur Barcelou-Duval, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madame
Madam
Telford, dans votre mot d'ouverture tout à l'heure, vous
Ms.
avez
Telford, in your
mentionné que
opening
vous avez été
statement,
pour la
you
première fois
said
informé
that
de la
you
situation
learned about the
le 2
situation for the first time on March
par Elder
2nd
Marques. Est-ce
by
que
Elder
c'est bien ça?
Marques. Is that correct?
Oui, ça c'est correct.
Yes, that's right.
Dans son témoignage, M. Marques
In his testimony,
indiquait plutôt que c'était
Mr. Marques
vous ou
said
bien
that
votre
you
adjointe qui
or
avait
your
communiqué avec lui
assistant
pour l'informer de la
contacted
situation.
him for information on the situation.
Comment est-ce que vous pouvez expliquer la
How can you
différence entre vos deux
explain the
témoignages?
discrepancy between your testimony and his?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. I just want to make sure I understand it correctly, and I want to make sure I answer correctly. So I'll speak in English.
Commonplace, as I said in an answer to an earlier question, for a chief of staff to call in seeking advice. I don't recall whether the chief of staff and I directly spoke in the first instance, or she spoke to my office and the message or a voicemail was left, and whether it was passed on in that manner to Mr. Marques. But the first time I learned the substance of what was going on was through Mr. Marques when he debriefed me on his conversation with the chief of staff to the Minister of Defense on March 2nd.
Donc, je comprends plus trop, là. C'est comme un peu flou.
I'm not sure I understand.
Vous n'êtes pas sûr si vous
bit
n'avez pas
vague. You're
entendu
saying
parler
you're
un
not
peu à travers les
sure
branches avant,
you
mais au
heard
final, la première
something
fois
at some
où vous en
point,
avez
but the
vraiment
first
entendu
time
parler,
you
c'est par
really
M.
learned about the
Marques.
matter was from
J'essaie de
Mr.
comprendre parce que M. Marques,
I'm trying to understand because Mr. Marques said that he took the initiative to speak with Mr.
Par la
Wernick,
suite référé à Mme Sherman.
then
Ce qui
spoke to
porte une
Ms.
certaine logique en
Sherman.
disant, j'ai été mandaté en tant que conseiller de prendre des
That's
étapes de
logical
plus, mais au
because
final, la
as an
personne qui prend les
advisor,
décisions dans le bureau du premier ministre,
the
c'est la
advisor
chef de
took certain
cabinet, c'est vous.
steps, but
Donc, comment
ultimately
est-ce que M.
you have
Marques aurait pu
to are in
prendre ces
charge of
décisions-là
decisions in the
sans avoir
PMO. So
l'ordre de votre
how did
part?
Mr. Marques make those decisions?
If you mean how did he make the decision on whether to go to the Deputy Secretary to Cabinet, I mean, first of all, Mr. Marques was a very senior staffer, and as he testified, he was keeping me updated and apprised on the next steps that he was taking after he informed me about what was going on. And he went and spoke to the clerk, which the clerk has also testified to, and the clerk brought in the Deputy Secretary to Cabinet to get involved. And this all happened within the course of hours, really. So this was something we acted immediately on because we were taking it very seriously.
Vous dites aussi dans votre témoignage que vous n'étiez pas au
You
courant
also
de la
said in your
nature
testimony that you were
sexuelle
not
des
aware of
allégations.
the sexual
Pourtant, on a vu dans
nature
des
of
articles de
the
presse,
complaint of the
des
allegations,
courriels qui auraient
yet
fuité comme
in
quoi le
the
bureau du conseil
media,
privé, eux, auraient été au fait
emails
que la
had
nature
revealed
des
that
allégations était sexuelle.
PCO
On a aussi
knew
vu
the
l'ombudsman, en fait, qui a
nature
réitéré
of
avoir
the
dit au ministre
allegations
qu'il
and
s'agissait
that the
d'allégations
minister
de
would have
nature
known that
sexuelle. Alors,
these
comment
were
ça se fait que si le conseil privé, le bureau de
allegations of
l'ombudsman
a
est au
sexual
courant, puis c'est
nature?
avec vous que
If
le
PCO
bureau du
knew
conseil
about
privé est
these
en communication
and you're in
avec le bureau du premier ministre,
communication
comment ça se fait que le bureau du premier ministre
with the
était pas au
PCO,
courant
why
que
didn't the
c'était de nature
PMO
sexuelle?
know about the nature of the allegations?
So I can speak to what I know, and that is, and I can also look at the testimony of the previous speakers as I have, and I believe that the clerk, Ms. Sherman, Mr. Marques, and Minister Sajjan have all spoken to the fact that they didn't know the nature of the complaint. And we did, as Elder Marques said, because we didn't know what it was, there was a possibility that it could be that it could be a sexual allegation. And so that's why we were taking it so seriously at the beginning. It's also why I followed up when I had no further information after some follow-up, why I went to the safety concern question. And I got assurance that it wasn't a safety concern.
Merci, mais je vous dirais que je trouve ça un petit peu difficile à croire, étant donné que ce qu'on voit dans les médias, c'est autre chose, et je serais surpris que le bureau du conseil privé vous aurait pas dit que ce soit de nature sexuelle, parce que c'est ce qui est écrit, qu'on voit dans la presse, dans les échanges. Vous me pardonnerez d'être sceptique. Peut-être le prochain élément que je voudrais vous demander, c'est quand la première fois que vous avez parlé de ce dossier-là, au premier ministre,
When was the first time you raised this issue with Prime Minister Trudeau, and how did he react when you brought up the issue with him the first time? I understand that in 2018 you never mentioned the issue to him. Did you deliberately withhold the information from him?
So there's a few things there. I'd like to start with your skepticism, which I understand, given news reports recently, as you said. And I think, what I would say is that it has been hard for everyone involved to separate what is information we have in the last number of months with the information we did not have in March of 2018. And so I think that is where some of the confusion and reason for skepticism exists, and where we've had to, everybody has had, and I know this committee has and has been working hard at this, to look at exactly who knew what when. And what I can assure you is that, the Prime Minister, like me, learned for the first time what the complaint was, anything about the complaint, when it was reported on in the media in March of 2021.
Donc, et vous, quand vous en aviez-vous parlé après mars 2021 de ce dossier-là avec le Premier ministre?
Did you discuss this matter with the Prime Minister, and if so, how did he react when he learned that you hid the existence of this matter from him?
We, of course, have discussed the news stories that have come out in the last couple of months. And we have been particularly focused on what they mean in terms of the action that needs to be taken to be protecting survivors who, thankfully, some of them anyways, and I'm sure, unfortunately, there are many more, but some of them are coming out and speaking publicly and sharing their stories so that we better know how to act so that we can support them. And that is what we are staying focused on.
I'm afraid we're already at 6 minutes and 20 seconds, so we'll have to cut it off there. Mr. Garrison, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to Ms. Telford for being with us today. I must admit I am a bit bemused by why my colleagues from the Liberal Party turned somersaults to prevent the invitation being issued to you. I'm still a little perplexed about something you've told us. And let me start with the one which I think you rightfully raised the issue of safety. And we know that if women are going to be able to serve equally in the Canadian Forces, there has to be that sense of safety there. But you said that you didn't know the nature of the complaint, you didn't have any details, yet you asked if it was a question of safety, and you were assured that it was not. how could you know that if you knew nothing about the nature of the complaint or its details?
It's a fair question that I can only tell you what I know, and that I asked that question because I was getting no information, because it seemed that nothing further can be done, and because I was very concerned and I was taking this very seriously. And I was then given this assurance, and that's all I can speak to.
So I'm going to leave that there, although I would, it is an interesting question of how someone could assure you of that, and I trust you'll follow up on that. Based on the statement you made just a few minutes ago in answer to a question, you said that you knew that the minister had been offered an envelope. And there's a tendency to refer to the allegations of misconduct against General Vance as rumors. These were not rumors. These were a complaint that was brought to the attention of the ombudsman, for which there was evidence both of the nature of the complaint and of the details of that complaint. These were offered to the minister, and he refused to look at them. You indicated that you were aware of that. When were you aware of the fact that the Minister of Defense refused to look at the evidence of this complaint that was offered by the ombudsman?
So I would just like to remind you through the chair that the only reason I believe that you or any of us know what was in the envelope was because of the public reporting in March. And at the time, in March of 2021, just to be clear, in March of 2018, I was aware from the original brief, I believe, that I received on this, that there was an envelope. I had absolutely no idea what was in it, nor did anybody else. And it was one of the reasons that we were determined to take the appropriate steps to follow up.
But that information was clearly offered to the Minister of Defense, so it seems peculiar that you didn't take the shortest route to finding out by asking him to have a look at the evidence that he was being offered. But just a minute ago, you also said at the time you knew it was possible that the allegation was of sexual misconduct. And I guess my question here is, given that Madame Deschamps' report existed and said that sexual misconduct was basically rampant in the Canadian military, didn't this ring a bell with you? Because this was an alarm bell, I guess I would say, because this is a complaint against the person in charge of rooting out sexual misconduct in the military. So it would seem to me that you would want to make sure that this is not what that complaint was about. Quite apart from the complainant, this is about the policies and procedures of the Canadian Armed Forces in dealing with sexual misconduct. So did you not think it would be important to figure out whether or not this was a sexual misconduct complaint at that time?
So there's a couple of things there as well, and I want to try to deal with both, at least two of the things you've touched on. One is, why not the shortest route as you suggested it? And what I would just remind you is that the minister came to seek advice after this unusual circumstance through his office. And the advice given from the independent Privy Council office that manages human resources across government, governor and council appointments, their advice was to redirect the ombudsperson to the Privy Council office. So unless you're suggesting we ignore that advice, that is the advice that we were given in terms of next steps by the appropriate people.
But we've had no testimony saying that they told him he could not look at that evidence. They suggested another path, but no one has testified here saying that they advised the minister he could not look at that evidence. We have not heard that in this committee.
Well, certainly what the advice was to myself and to Mr. Marques, to Elder at the time, was that it should be the Privy Council office responsible for the management of governor and council appointments across governments looking into these things. I don't think you would want political staff, let alone politicians, looking into doing their own investigations.
But no one's suggesting the minister should have investigated. But what we are saying, and I'm certainly saying it very clearly, is that he did need to find out whether there was a sexual misconduct complaint against the Chief of Defence Staff, who was in charge of rooting out sexual misconduct in the Canadian military. This is not just, I don't want to demean any other complaints, but not just a run-of-the-mill complaint about sexual misconduct. This is against the person who's in charge of rooting it out in the Canadian military, which is what makes this different from all the others.
I would remind you that we didn't know the nature of the complaint at all at the time. And so that is, that is why we were trying to take the appropriate steps to follow up. We were taking it very seriously, however, right from the get-go. And I would also remind you that that is, this is one of the reasons I did ask that safety question and get assurance on it.
But if you can I just ask one more quick question here?
Quick one.
If you didn't think this was a sexual misconduct complaint, what kind of complaint did you think it was?
I think as you can, I think you even actually asserted just a moment ago that there are many other types of complaints. So I'm not going to get into speculating on what they could have been, but there are many different types of complaints that can come forward.
All right, thank you very much. On to Ms. Aleslev, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So once again, on March 2nd till March 16th, who made the decision not to tell the Prime Minister?
So let me just remind you through the chair that on March 2nd, I was learning about this complaint and I was immediately acting.
So once you learned about the complaint, you had to make a decision to tell the Prime Minister or not.
No, actually, I would remind you that I actually didn't learn about I knew nothing about the complaint. I knew that there was something that the ombudsperson said they have a complaint that they apparently couldn't work on, and they raised with the minister.
When you found out about the complaint, who made the decision not to tell the Prime Minister?
When we found out about the unusual circumstance that the minister found himself in, we immediately took it seriously. We immediately took action with the appropriate people.
You took it
who
seriously,
should follow up
but
on
did
it.
not tell the Prime Minister. Who made the decision not to tell the Prime Minister?
Madam Chair, on March 2nd, I learned that the minister was seeking advice.
Okay,
and then you knew.
okay,
Order,
I'm
Chair.
going to interrupt
Point of
here.
order, Chair.
Okay, this has got
The witness is
the
allowed to answer.
interpreters are pulling their hair out. So please, if you ask a question, wait for the answer, and then you can ask another question. All right?
Madam
we're
Chair.
making it very difficult for them. So go ahead, Madame Aleslev. You can ask your question.
Madam Chair, the witness is not answering the question. Who made the decision not to tell the Prime Minister of a serious allegation against the Chief of the Defence Staff?
Madam Chair, at the time, what I was wanting to ensure was done to protect the complainant was that the proper next steps were taken. And that's what I did immediately, and that's what I took seriously. And then there was no more information to be had, as I've told you, except for the fact that I did get assurance that there was not a safety issue.
Madam Chair, we heard from the Clerk of the Privy Council that there was a memo to the Prime Minister, and you discussed whether or not to extend his tenure. Who made the decision not to tell the Prime Minister of the allegations against the Chief of the Defence Staff?
Madam Chair, I'd like to correct that. I believe the member's misinformed because there was not a note that went to the Prime Minister about extending the tenure for the Chief of Defence Staff. There actually are not term lengths to the tenure for the Chief of Defence Staff. He serves at the pleasure.
There was who made the decision not to tell the Prime Minister, not when he received a pay raise through a governor in council, not when there was a memo to the Prime Minister discussing options for him to be replaced before the next election. On multiple occasions, who made the decision not to tell the Prime Minister about these serious allegations?
So I believe, Madam Chair, that the member is referring actually to the performance management system that the Privy Council office has in place. And in a memo to do with the performance management system, or a decision note that came directly from the clerk to the Prime Minister, there were discussions, which was actually, not usually in the performance management system. There were some
Madam Chair,
around
Madam
succession
Chair.
planning.
No,
Madam Chair.
Madame
Madam Chair.
Aleslev, please allow the witness to answer the question.
There is only one
Madame
question,
Aleslev.
Madam Chair.
Madame Aleslev, please allow the witness to answer the question.
I'd just like to correct the member, Madam Chair, that in that briefing note, it was talking about succession planning and actually providing options, none of which were imminent, around the Chief of Defence Staff and planning ahead.
Thank you. So you're saying that someone did inform the Prime Minister of the serious allegations against the CDS?
Madam Chair, I'm not sure what the member is referring to here.
I'm asking, was the Prime Minister made aware of the serious allegations against the Chief of the Defence Staff?
Madam Chair, the Prime Minister,
yes or no,
became aware of the allegation, the nature of the allegation, the substance of the allegation in March of 2021 when it was publicly reported, and we all learned what the details and the nature of the complaint were.
We're at 5 minutes now. On to Mr. Spengeman, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and welcome to the committee, Ms. Telford. If you'll indulge me for a moment, I just wanted to put a couple of points on the record. I think there was some discussion earlier with respect to the nature of the action and whether or not it was sexual in nature. Three witnesses appeared before this committee, and I just wanted to put on the record what they said. Elder Marques on April 19th testified before us, and I'm quoting, "I believe I was told that the issue was an issue of personal misconduct. I think my presumption was certainly that it could be of a sexual nature, but I don't think it was actually, I was actually given that information specifically." That's Elder Marques. Then the former clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, in testimony before our committee on April 6th, stated, and I quote, "I learned of the specific allegations earlier this year in the media reports. I was not aware of the specifics of the allegation. I became aware of them this year." And then finally, Ms. Sherman, Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet, testified to us on March 26th. And again, I'm quoting, "Based on my conversation with the former ombudsman, I did not have information about the nature of the complaint or specifics that would have enabled further action." And that's just for the record, for the benefit of colleagues, Madam Chair, and our witness as well. And I thank you. Ms. Telford, if I can just take you back to your opening remarks, you focused on the role of the public service when it comes to seeking advice and conducting follow-up, and specifically in this case, the Privy Council office. And you noted that PCO assured you that they were the most appropriate body to look into this. And we also heard directly several times from PCO officials and the central role that they play when it comes to GIC or governor and council appointments, of which the former CDS was one. And I'm wondering if you could expand on this a bit more, if political staff, and you made reference to this earlier, but if political staff were charged with overseeing this type of circumstance with an appointee, do you think that this would be seen as a legitimate process when it comes to trust in the public service, trust in the Canadian forces, trust in investigative processes? Would we have that when we give this kind of scenario to political staff or elected officials, as you pointed out?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think given how difficult it has been, even of late, for us all to keep partisanship out of these discussions, I think it's just a further demonstration of how important it is for there to be independent and objective people who are and it is why the public service is there, but also to manage ongoing governors in council appointments that go beyond perhaps the life of a government. So they are there to manage. They are also experts in doing this. They've spent their careers in becoming experts in the areas in which they work. I have deep respect for the advice they give, and it's why we followed their advice in this case.
Thank you very much, Ms. Telford. And I want to take you back to the conversation about Elder Marques. And we heard from Mr. Marques recently on his role and his engagement with PCO. And I understand at the time, Mr. Marques, as you've described, was a very senior member of your staff in the Prime Minister's office. Going back to the sort of ordinary course of business in PMO, would you consider it a normal process for you to ask a senior member of your office to seek advice from PCO and then to keep you updated with respect to any developments that flow from that?
Absolutely. You know, we have an incredible and hardworking group of senior staff who have worked extremely hard for many years now, and Mr. Marques was definitely one of those staff. He unfortunately doesn't work with us anymore, but he is somebody that I could turn to follow up on any number of files or phone calls from chiefs of staff who needed advice on something. And it was completely normal and par for the course to then, whether it was wander upstairs from here where the Privy Council offices are, or to pick up the phone and call our counterparts in the Privy Council office for advice. That is how things work day in and day out.
Thank you, Ms. Telford. I've only got about 30 seconds, but I'm just wondering if you could briefly give us your reflections on your reaction when the word came back that really nothing more could be done in this case. Nothing came back from PCO that would help in any way, or from the ombudsperson. How did you react to that conclusion?
I was concerned. As I think I said in my opening statement, I was troubled by it, and that's why Elder and I talked through if there was just anything else we could suggest to them to do, or anything else that could give us any sense of what this was about. So he did, he did go back. He did keep pushing and still couldn't. And then we did ask the question around whether we could at least be given any assurance around whether it was a safety issue or safety related issue, and we were assured it was not.
All right.
Thank you, Ms. Telford. I think that's my time for this round. Thank you, Madam Chair.
That's your time, Mr. Spengeman. On to Monsieur Barcelou-Duval, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Il me semble que, de façon générale,
it seems to me that, generally speaking, a chief of staff takes part in cabinet meetings, unless I'm mistaken.
Pourtant, c'est l'ombudsman, c'est au ministre de la Défense, M. Sajjan, qui s'est adressé au départ. Est-ce que M. Sajjan, à un quelconque moment, vous a parlé du dossier?
The main person involved here. Did you speak with him? Were there any discussions at all at that time?
So participate in might not be the right word. I do have the great privilege of sitting in cabinet meetings at a table to the side of the room. In terms of Minister Sajjan and whether he and I spoke to this at the time, no, I don't believe we did. And his office contacted us on his behalf immediately. We then immediately got follow-up through, or had follow-up. We immediately followed up, or had the Privy Council follow up rather, to give him the advice that he was seeking.
Donc, vous avez jamais eu de conversation avec
So you
M.
never
Sajjan
had any conversations with Mr. Sajjan with regard to General Vance?
Certainly, I have had conversations over the years with the minister about General Vance, but not on this specifically.
Je trouve ça quand même surprenant parce que c'est sérieux les allégations
surprising because the allegations are serious, the ones that have been raised against General Vance. You are the chief of staff to the Prime Minister.
Lui vous a contacté, mais ça fait un peu lourd comme jeu de téléphone de devoir toujours passer au travers toute la file
There's a lot
alors
of
qu'il pouvait
telephoning
juste échanger
around
directement avec vous.
when you could have spoken directly with each other,
par
and
exemple le bureau du conseil privé n'arrivait pas à obtenir d'informations et de
PCO could not get any more information. Didn't you ever think of asking Mr. Sajjan to meet with the ombudsman? He refused to meet Mr. Ombudsman at any time. Perhaps someone should have told him to actually look at the documents.
So a few things. I treated what I was told about like it could be a serious allegation. But I didn't know how serious it was or was not. I had absolutely no information on it. So I just want to make that very clear because I know that that has been confusing for us all as a lot of information has come out recently. And I just want to remind us what we did and didn't know in March of 2018. Second, in terms of lots of phoning around, which does feel like day-to-day life here. It is a lot of emails and phoning and meetings in my job, as I often say. But why didn't I speak to Minister Sajjan? I'm not sure that there was any more information that he and I could have appropriately discussed on this. I had via Elder Marques and the Chief of Staff at National Defense what had transpired. We sought advice on that. And the advice on that, to your last point, why not?
I'm sorry, but your time is up.
On to Mr. Garrison, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think what's clear to us now that the phenomena that Madame Deschamps identified of there not being a good path for complainants and there not being consequences for perpetrators of sexual misconduct in the military was definitely illustrated by this allegation against the Chief of Defense Staff. And so it would seem to me that, as I said, that alarm bells should have gone off when it was a possible complaint of sexual misconduct against the Chief of Defense Staff. And it would seem to me this should have been job one for the Minister of Defense. So I had a look at the mandate letters that were issued from the Prime Minister to the Minister of Defense. The first one makes no mention of sexual misconduct issue whatsoever, even after the previous government had already received Madame Deschamps' report. The next two, in 2019 and 21, make a bland statement about making sure there's a workplace free of sexual harassment. So at no time did the Prime Minister direct the Minister of Defense to implement the recommendations of the Deschamps Commission. Can you explain why this direction was not given to the Minister of Defense?
So I don't unfortunately have the mandate letter in front of me from 2015, but I actually do believe that there is language, not perhaps specific to the Deschamps report, but there are certainly language around efforts around inclusion, and I believe even as specific as going at, I'm going on a bit of a distance of memory here, but on addressing well, certainly inclusion issues, and I think perhaps even harassment. But regardless of what was in the mandate letter, I can tell you about the work that was being done over the course of the first mandate, and I referenced some of that in my opening statement. But including, we actually had a stock take with the leadership across of the S&I community and security intelligence services, talking specifically, and actually it was a meeting led by the Prime Minister with Minister Sajjan and a number of other ministers, relevant ministers that were there. And I can remember Minister Sajjan speaking at that committee about the enormity of pulling everyone together to specifically talk about inclusion and looking for plans. We asked for the numbers in advance so that we weren't simply looking at numbers, that we were looking at action plans. And as I said in my opening statement, I am not here to say any of that was perfect. There is clearly so much more work that needs to be done. And I've been doing a lot of reflecting on that meeting and what more in the meetings that followed, the work that followed on what more could have been done. Because you're right, more needed to be done and more needs to be done.
Madame Deschamps' report specifically called for creating an independent complaints process and also for a center for providing services to survivors that was independent of the chain of command. Neither of those happened. Yes, a sexual misconduct support center was set up, but it was not independent of the chain of command administratively, and no independent complaint mechanism was created. So how could these two key recommendations, no matter what else was going on, have been neglected by this government for 6 years?
So I actually did find it in my notes, Madam Chair. So I would just like to put it on the record that yes, in the mandate letter in 2015, there was a line that says establish and maintain a workplace free from harassment and discrimination. But let me also concede that obviously there is so much more work to be done on that front. I'm not trying to suggest we have accomplished that by any means at this point. In terms of why the Deschamps report was not fully implemented, I think we've heard a lot about that of late. You've heard me reflecting on that personally. There were debates on what more could have been done in the first mandate, but as you yourself said, many steps were taken. There clearly are more that need to be taken and taken quickly, though, and I believe that's why, I know that's why I was party to the discussions as to why the recent announcement ensures that actions can be taken very quickly as Madame Arbour makes recommendations.
All right, thank you very much. Monsieur Paulus, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Telford, avec
Ms. Telford, with all due respect, I have to say that I find what you're saying today is completely inconsistent. But if you're saying the truth, so that in March of 2018 you did not see fit to inform the Prime Minister, you said that you were not aware of the nature of the allegations, even though there are emails to prove the contrary. So I would like to know what happened in July. Michael Burnick, the former Privy Council advisor said that the Prime Minister had received a memo to recommend a pay increase for General Vance and to give him a risk bonus. If that's the case, can you give us that document, the one that Mr. Wernick sent to the Prime Minister?
I would be happy to follow up on that. I would need to consult with the Privy Council office on that note that they provided to the Prime Minister.
Merci. J'aimerais que le comité le reçoive avant le 30 mai.
I'd like the committee to get that memo before May 30th. Now, when Mr. Wernick, who on March 2nd knew of the allegations, a few months later recommended a pay increase, talked about it to you and the Prime Minister, don't you find it would have been relevant since the information was out in July, the Ombudsman had received a complaint and had even resigned from his position given your reaction? Don't you think that that would have been the right time to raise issues concerning General Vance with the Prime Minister before recommending a pay increase and a bonus?
I am not aware, and I certainly was not aware then, that the ombudsperson resigned because of anything that you're suggesting. And in July, and this note that you're referring to, as I was trying to correct your colleague on earlier, it was a note through the usual performance management system that is managed through the Privy Council office, through the Deputy Secretary of Cabinet. Oui?
Madame Telford.
Ms. Telford, you're telling me that you did not know that the Canadian Forces Ombudsman, you didn't know about his March resignation letter after what happened. He couldn't believe what was happening. And you're saying that you, as the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, was not aware of this. That's relevant, important information. But let me come back to the issue at hand. So the recommendation was made to keep General Vance, to give him a bonus and a pay increase that, even though there were allegations against him in March, should all of this not have been raised with the Prime Minister? You said that politicians and political staff should not be involved here, but I'm sorry, the Prime Minister is the one who appoints the Chief of Defence staff. So don't you think it would have been important to mention any of this with the Prime Minister at the time?
So you're asking about the performance pay system, and I just want to be clear that, you know, and you're referring to a raise and a bonus. There is a performance pay system where all eligible governor and council appointments go through an annual performance management process. And there is a set of agreed upon principles that they use to assess this performance. And the performance management program is quite extensive. It covers all of the deputy ministers and associate deputies.
Okay, Madame. Yes. Madame, je comprends, mais lorsque la recommandation,
yes, I understand that, but when the clerk of the Privy Council sent the recommendation to the Prime Minister, that would have been followed up with an authorization. The Prime Minister should have, or would have signed that note.
Yes, the performance management note was a note from the clerk for the Prime Minister, and the clerk provided all of the relevant information that applied through the performance management process in that note. And as you know, I went to the Privy Council office in March 2018 as actually the first step, well, or Mr. Marques went to the Privy Council office as an immediate first step. And so they had all of the information on this.
Point of order.
Go ahead, Mr. Baker.
Mr. Paulus is consistently interrupting the witness, and I'm not able to hear her responses as a result. And I'd ask that you ask the member to allow the witness to finish her answers before asking his next question.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Paulus.
Si vous me donnez plus de temps pour la traduction, Madame la
Présidente, if you give me more time for interpretation, I'd be happy to wait.
Madame Telford, je reviens sur
Ms.
ma
Telford,
question.
Let me come back to my question.
Savoir si le
I
Premier
would like to
ministre
know
a
whether the
signé
Prime Minister
pour
signed
autoriser
off
l'augmentation de salaire.
on the pay
General Vance.
increase for General Vance.
Yes, I believe he approved that note.
Mais vous devez le savoir,
An
comme
order
chef de
in
cabinet,
council
comment ça
noted.
fonctionne. Là, je veux dire, est-ce que, en temps normal, le Premier ministre ou l'autopème,
You know how this works. Normally the Prime Minister, or perhaps there's a rubber stamp signature. Was that done in this case?
Did I auto-pen the note? No.
Donc, le Premier ministre a signé.
So the Prime Minister signed off on the note. Therefore, he took the advice from Mr. Wernick, and there was no further discussion on General Vance and the complaint which had been raised by the Ombudsman.
Let me just remind you what there was to be or not to be discussed. There was a complaint brought forward in March 2018 to the ombudsperson that he said existed to the minister. And then we knew nothing else about it. We didn't know the nature of the complaint, the substance of the complaint, or the details of the complaint. So I'm not sure what you would have had us discuss, but the details and nature of the complaint is not something that we can revisit. We did not have it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Paulus, your time
let
is
it go
up.
a little bit longer. So it's on to Monsieur Robillard, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Bonjour, Madame Telford.
Good afternoon, Ms. Telford, and thank you for being here. When you look at what happened in 2018 and the many survivors who came forward this year with their stories about their own experiences within the armed forces, is there anything else you would like to share with this committee based on what you know now and any thoughts you may have had since these revelations came forward? You said you've thought about this issue many times over the past few weeks, and I know the committee would appreciate your thinking on this issue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And look, I would not claim to be an expert on what all the best next steps are, but I am someone who has spent many years now caring deeply and passionately, specifically on these issues and on issues of supporting and empowering and protecting women. And over the past 5 years in particular, since I have been in government and in this role, I have had the great privilege of getting to know a number of women in the armed forces, and particularly a number of the senior women in the armed forces who I've been able to have conversations with. And I have learned so much from them. Though, as I said in my opening statement, I've reflected on how much more I need to learn from them and how much more we need to, or how much harder we have to work at providing them a space where they can be heard and where actions can be taken, and that we need people outside of the system as well to force that change because it clearly cannot all happen within the armed forces alone. And I have a lot of hope for what the work that Madame Arbour is going to do, but we all need to stay on it in the meantime, including this committee, I hope.
Madame Telford, je crois savoir que vous avez eu l'occasion de vous asseoir avec des femmes des forces armées canadiennes et d'avoir des conversations directes avec ces femmes courageuses. Je ne peux qu'imaginer les mots puissants.
I just can't imagine the powerful message they shared with you and the impact of their words on you and on the actions of our government. I believe that those voices are the ones we should first and foremost listen to when decisions are taken on exactly how to move forward and how to rebuild trust in the process again.
I think that's right. The staff who work with me, work closely with me, know that there's a breakfast meeting that I would never miss, and it wasn't really a meeting; it was a breakfast, but a working breakfast with some of the members of the armed forces, known as the Awesome Women with Rank, and they were the most senior women in the armed forces. Who got together and shared with me some of their stories. And as I said in my opening, I've reflected a lot on what I did and didn't learn from them because maybe there were different ways I could have asked questions or created an even safer space for some of the conversations, or maybe not. These are the things one reflects on after the fact. But I did learn so much in those conversations, stories about, what it was like to try to, and I know that there are members of this committee who can speak to these stories as well, but I learned from them stories about what it was like to try to find childcare on bases and uniform issues. And we did talk about power and power dynamics within the armed forces as it related to gender and beyond gender. But I know I've reflected publicly as well that I felt really honored to be there, and also reflected on the fact of, if I hadn't been a woman chief of staff, would a man have been welcomed at that breakfast? And I knew that I was particularly privileged to be in a position that I could go into a room like that. And I was especially pleased when they suggested, or at least one of them suggested, and we made it happen, to invite the Prime Minister to join them one morning. And it's actually a day that I have previously referred to as one of my favorite days on the job.
All right. Thank you very much, Monsieur Robial. Committee members, if I am fierce with time, we might be able to get 2 complete rounds in, but it means I have to be fierce. All right. Are we ready? Okay. All right, then. Thanks. On to Madame Gallant, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to the witness. So you personally let his signature go on those documents while knowing the CDS had open allegations against him?
To be clear, Madam Chair, sorry,
just a yes or no is cool.
Well, I just want to remind you what we did and didn't know at that time.
You've made that statement several times. I just want to know, you personally let him make his signature on that at-risk pay approval without him knowing, and you knew he didn't know. If that was your decision not to tell him before he signed?
I want to remind you about what we did and didn't know at the time, which is we didn't know anything about this complaint. We didn't know the substance, the nature, or the details of the complaint.
But the Prime Minister was never told of any serious allegation about General Vance. So who made that decision?
I want to remind you that while I took the information extremely seriously that the minister, through his office, brought to my office, and that we then passed to the Privy Council office who took carriage of it, we actually didn't know the seriousness or the nature of
the Prime Minister was deliberating on the succession plan for the CDS and was not told of the allegations against him. Who made that decision?
The performance management program is actually quite expansive and consults quite a number of people. It's a program that's in place for all senior officials across the public service, including deputy ministers and associates.
Okay, so we know that, Madam Telford, thank you. Mm-hmm. But while considering approving a pay raise for General Vance, the Prime Minister was never told of serious allegations against him. Who made the decision not to tell the Prime Minister?
Madam Chair, through you, I would just remind us of what we knew, which was we didn't know anything about the allegation at the time.
You knew there was an allegation, Madam Chair.
Point of order. Point of order, Madam Chair. Point of order.
Madame Gallant, please allow the witness to finish what she's saying first.
Just a yes or no is what we know.
Madame Gallant.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Point of order.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Baker.
Madame Gallant, like her colleague previously, is not allowing the witness to answer questions. Ms. Telford has information, I believe is attempting to answer the question. I would like to hear the answer. I think the folks at home would like to hear the answer. And so I would ask that you ask Madame Gallant to allow Ms. Telford to finish her answers before asking her next question.
Ms. Telford, if you'd like to finish your answer, please.
I just think it's two things. It's important to remember that there wasn't an allegation in terms of any content around an allegation to speak of. There was a complaint that the ombudsperson raised with Minister Sajjan that he was not able to do anything with, and that we were not able to do anything with. The Privy Council office wasn't able to do anything with. And it's the Privy Council office who puts together the performance management program.
Okay, thank you. So it was the Privy Council office who decided then not to let the Prime Minister know. Because my only question is, who made that decision? So the answer is the name of a person.
No, the answer is that there wasn't an allegation in terms of something for which there was that we didn't know the nature of the allegation
You
or
knew
the
there-
content,
Madam
the
Chair,
details.
there was an allegation.
Point of order.
Madame Galante.
Madam Chair, point of order.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Spengeman.
Madam Chair, there's an additional consideration to the point that was raised repeatedly by my colleague, Mr. Baker, which is that it's impossible for interpretation to follow when a member is talking over top of a witness. So I would ask you once again to encourage this particular member to let the witness answer.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Madame Galante, if you have a follow-on question.
So my question is, who decided not to tell the Prime Minister of the existence of an allegation against the General?
Madam Chair, through you to the member, I would just again say we didn't have any information about the allegation. We didn't know anything about it. It was something that all the appropriate follow-up was done through the appropriate people, and the appropriate people to do that follow-up was the Privy Council office. And I believe the Privy Council has all of the required information also to inform the performance management process, which they also manage.
But the minister knew.
Thank you very much.
Nature.
On to Mr. Bagnall, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a couple of comments and before I go to my questions. First of all, there's some things said that don't really jive with the evidence that we've got from today or from other members. One was the words "drop the ball." Well, when you turn something over for an investigation at record speed almost, you've hardly dropped the ball, and or covered up. The word covered up was used once. What could be covered up when it was turned over to investigators? Investigators did everything they can with actually no information. Also, the word serious has been mentioned various times. It certainly was a serious allegation, but we didn't find that out till this year. And at the time, as numerous witnesses have said, they had no idea what the allegation was, if it was serious or not. So just to make sure. There's also, has come up in our discussion about all the things that have been done since the Deschamps report. Both today, there's been some, and previously, a number of things, actions that have been taken. Of course, everyone admits it's not enough. And I just want to add to that list that the very strong administrative directive, DAOD 9005-1, which I read in detail about a month ago, but really does make serious changes to the directive's whole direction to the members of the military to try and address this serious systemic problem. So going on from all those moves that have been made, those improvements that have been made that certainly haven't solved the problem yet, in budget 2021 included a substantial investment to address the very issues we are discussing at committee today. I can imagine the very active discussions on this matter when the government was working on the budget, and that questions around how the budget could be a tool to support much needed cultural change were no doubt top of mind. Obviously, funding alone is not enough, nor is it a silver bullet, but the budgets reflect a government's values, and it was clear in this budget that the government was taking this matter seriously. This is $236 million investment to eliminate sexual misconduct and general-based violence in the Canadian Forces. Ms. Telford, I know you cannot divulge the cabinet process or those deliberations that led to this funding in the budget, or supporting this funding in the budget. But I'm wondering if you have any reflections from that process about the value of this investment and what you think you can do, and any other thoughts that might be relevant on this subject.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can speak to some of the conversations, certainly that I was outside of cabinet that I was privy to in preparation for the announcement, and some of the steps that have been taken in recent weeks. That, you know, I can't yet speak to the value because that's in the future, but I really hope they will be valuable steps. They were certainly taken with the intention of them leading to real action and quickly. It's why it was clearly described that Madame Arbour would have the capacity to make recommendations throughout her time working on this extremely important subject, and the government committed to following through on those recommendations as they came forward. And I think that was an extraordinarily important decision for the governments to address what has been. It's a concern, I think, in so many areas, but especially in an area of this import, which is to ensure that this isn't just another report. This is an assurance that there will be action. And the question really is going to be, which actions next? But we've shown that the funding is there, the commitment is there, an incredibly powerful and credible person who happens to be a woman has been put in charge of making sure that the right recommendations are given, and as I said, the commitment is there to take action on any of those recommendations and all of those recommendations.
All right, thank you very much. On to Monsieur Barcelou-Duval, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Vous savez, ce qui me sidère, en fait, depuis
What
le
I
début
find shocking
de
from
cette
the
étude-là, c'est qu'à chaque
start
fois qu'on
of this
reçoit un témoin,
committee study is that every time we hear from a witness, they say, it's not my fault. It's not my fault we haven't taken this matter farther, we just couldn't. And I don't know how often we heard this.
Et que ce soit vous, que ce soit Madame Telford, Monsieur Marques,
Ms. Telford, Mr. Marques, Ms. Sherman, Mr. Wernick,
Monsieur Sajjan,
Mr. Sajjan, it was nobody's fault. It's as if it was a systemic problem. Nobody was able to get to the bottom of the matter or fix the problem. That's what the message we're getting from your government. And I also understand that Mr. Sajjan was presented with the information by the ombudsman, and Mr. Sajjan refused to take that information. If he had taken the information, everything would have been out in the open and we would not be here today. So at the end of the day, that's where the problem started. Do you still have confidence in Mr. Sajjan as Defense Minister?
I just want to start with, and I will absolutely directly address your question, but I want to start with your skepticism about it being a systemic problem. I think you've touched on exactly the right thing in your lead up to that comment, in that this is complicated, and it is in that there was clearly not somewhere that this woman who we learned about in March of 2021, there was clearly not somewhere that she felt was safe or appropriate for her to go in 2018 or whenever it was that she first approached the ombudsperson.
Je vous dis pas qu'il n'y a pas de problème systémique, mais il y a des personnes dans le système.
I'm not saying there's not a systemic problem, but there are people in the system and people are making bad decisions, and that's why I'm asking you whether you still have confidence in Mr. Sajjan as minister.
I don't know anybody who is more passionate. There's a few of us who tries perhaps to give him a run for this, but who is more passionate about inclusion. And he stands for not only inclusion, but bringing his lived experience to the job. And he did exactly, in this instance, he was faced with such an unusual circumstance, and his first step was to seek advice.
Okay, all right. Do you have a quick question, Mr. Barcelou-Duval?
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente. Tout à l'heure,
yes, thank you, Madam Chair. A little earlier, when I asked you how the Prime Minister reacted when he learned what happened, and that you had a conversation with him about General Vance this year, you said that he put his hand on his heart and said, we have to fix the problem within our armed forces. And he wasn't mad at you that you hadn't brought up the matter earlier?
I don't believe. I think some of those were your words and not mine. Having said that, what the Prime Minister and I did talk about when we first learned in March of 2021 what the complaint was that was brought to the ombudsperson in 2018 was it added to now what it's going to inform our path forward. It tells us one more way because we now do know what the complaint was from back then. So it tells us one more way in which we need to tackle the very subject that this committee is looking into.
All right, thank you. On to Mr. Garrison, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Ms. Telford, I do stand corrected. The same phrase, work with senior leaders of the Canadian Armed Forces to establish and maintain a workplace free from harassment does appear in the 2015 mandate letter. I just plead small font. So it's clear that none of the letters referred to Madame Deschamps' key recommendations or implementing them. And you've mentioned a lot of initiatives that were taken since the Liberals became government. But here's where we are. On April 26th of this year, the Department of National Defense tabled a report in Parliament on Operation Honour's lack of success. And what it reported was 581 reports of sexual assault over the term of Operation Honour, which was about 5 years, and 221 incidents of sexual harassment were logged in that same period. And we know that these incidents are underreported. So this means currently in the Canadian Armed Forces, incidents of sexual assault and sexual harassment are happening at least once every 2 days. And so I find the failure to tackle those key recommendations of Madame Deschamps shocking at this point. What do we say to people serving in the Canadian Forces now? We're going to start another study and there'll be some interim recommendations. This is a crisis. And if this were any other institution, we would have seen far more extensive action by now, including replacing those who failed to deal with this problem.
So I would just correct one bit, which is that there were, I believe, in terms of you suggesting that the recommendations of the Deschamps report weren't followed. There was some work flowing from the Deschamps report. There absolutely was. Having said that, not all of it was done. And I think we all know that, so I won't get into all of that. But and more of it needs to be done, and that is what I hope everyone is going to be. And I certainly commit to this, to working on and making a priority in the coming weeks, let alone months. And that's the kind of time frame we should be talking about, as weeks and months, even though it is going to ultimately take longer than that for an entire system to change. Because as has been discussed at this committee, this is a systemic problem. This is not a simple or straightforward problem, as we know from many areas. But we also know that, you mentioned the data and the numbers that have come out in the report. I have mixed reaction to them. It is always horrifying when you hear that women are not safe or men are not safe in their work environment. And, but at the same time, and at the same time, that collecting that data and having that data to inform the work going forward is actually a step in the process moving forward.
All right,
having
thanks,
data.
Mr. Garrison, do you have one last quick question, please?
Well, I guess I would ask quickly, when mandate letters are issued, is there any follow-up later? So does the Prime Minister go back to ministers, like on this thing, where he said 3 times, work on a harassment-free workplace? Has the Prime Minister gone back to the minister to say, you clearly haven't accomplished what I asked you to do here?
So absolutely, there is follow-up on mandate letters. And actually, there is a unit within the Privy Council office that was brought in under this government and under the leadership of the former clerk, the results and delivery unit. And part of what they do is keep track of work against these different projects.
Okay, thank you. On to Mr. Bazan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Telford, you decided not to do anything with this complaint. We know that the ombudsman offered evidence to Minister Sajjan. You could have looked at those details. The minister had a chance to take those details and act upon them, but you made the decision not to act. And the defense ombudsman testified here at committee, and he said that these were allegations of sexual misconduct. We know that there was emails going back and forth between the Privy Council office and political staffers, and they all talked about that these were issues of sexual harassment, actually, is the terms that they use. So many people knew. Why didn't you tell the Prime Minister?
So first, Madam Chair, I would like to correct the member when he says that I did not do anything. I actually acted immediately upon learning of the existence of a complaint that I knew nothing about. I did not have this complaint in my possession. I didn't know the nature or the details of this complaint, and yet I acted immediately and I took it very seriously.
You must have known something, Ms. Telford. You said that you realized...
Madame la Présidente.
Go ahead, Mr. Robillard.
Bon.
Thank you very much. I am sick and tired of not being able to hear Ms. Telford's answers. As members, we have the right to fully participate in the work of this committee, and I would like the member of the opposition not to take away my privilege to ask questions.
Merci, Monsieur Robillard.
Thank you, Mr. Robillard.
Please.
I hope that doesn't take away from my time, Madam Chair.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't. It's a point of order. It stops the clock. So, Madam Chair, I'll say this, that, Ms. Telford says she doesn't know what was in the evidence, but yet she's already made the decision that this allegation didn't involve a safety issue. And we know from testimony from Elder Marques, who was here, and they spoke, as Ms. Telford already said, they spoke many times about this issue. And by May 5th, there's lots of emails talking about this as sexual harassment. So again, Ms. Telford, based upon all the evidence that we already have, why didn't you inform the Prime Minister?
So once again, Madam Chair, I would just like to correct the member through you. I did not make a decision that this was not a safety issue. That was a question that I asked. That was something I wanted assurance about because it was out of concern. It was that I didn't know anything else. And so actually, these were the actions that I was taking to try to ensure that a complainant was protected, followed up on, supported in whatever ways I had the ability to find.
But that never happened.
That did not include me becoming the investigator in this. That would have been entirely inappropriate for the political staff or politicians of this government.
But we know that there was no investigation.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Point of order.
Look, if we allow all these points of order, and if we allow the
point of order, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Baker.
Point of order.
Talk out the clock.
Point of order.
Go ahead, Mr.
Mr. Bazan once again is interrupting the witness in her responses to our question. Ms. Telford is trying to respond, and I would ask you to direct Mr. Bazan to allow her to answer so that I can hear her responses, so that folks at home can hear the responses, and so that the interpreters who are interpreting for us can do their work.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Go back to you, Mr. Bazan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Telford, how many times a day would you meet with the Prime Minister?
It entirely depends on the day.
And how many times would the Privy Council clerk meet with the Prime Minister on issues on a regular type of day?
It very much depends on the day. I can tell you that during the pandemic that we are currently still very much in, every day is different.
So, but you do tend that both the Privy Council office clerk as well as you as Chief of Staff have unfettered access to the Prime Minister. Now, there's many times I suspect that you talk about national defense issues, including with General Vance. Why at any one of those points in times didn't you brief the Prime Minister on these allegations, whether they were sexual context or not? There's allegations against the Chief of Defense Staff. Shouldn't the Prime Minister have known about those allegations?
Madam Chair, the member refers to them as plural allegations now too. And I just want to remind all of you that at the time we were told about a complaint that we knew nothing about, that we acted on immediately, we took seriously because we didn't know what it was about and we wanted to take it seriously. And having learned in March 2021, I think that's what it was about. I think it's further evidence as to why it's important to always take these complaints as seriously as you can and to do as much as you can, which is what we did in March 2018. And unfortunately, we couldn't find out any further information at the time.
All right, thank you very much. On to Madame Vanderbilt, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here, Ms. Telford. I have heard the Minister and the Prime Minister say on many occasions that while we have taken important steps to address these serious and longstanding challenges, it's clear we haven't done enough, nor have we moved fast enough. I appreciate those words. I know they're not easy to say, but they are very, very important to acknowledge. That's how we move forward, and that's how we do more. So it is clear that more needs to be done and is being done. But what about time? I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the speed of that work, how we can make sure that it happens quickly, recognizing the urgency of the situation for so many women and men in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Madam Speaker, I think we need to move as quickly as we can. And I think that's why it's important that as part of the announcement announcements that were made recently, there were multiple steps taken and there are multiple tracks being worked on to ensure that as much can be done as possible, as quickly as possible. And so there was the appointment within the armed forces around culture change. There was the appointment of Madame Arbour outside the armed forces, whose recommendations can be acted on as she makes the recommendations, and our commitment as a government to doing that. And in addition to that, there's the work the committee's doing. And in addition to that, I think we have to continue to be open to what else we can do. And it's how I have always tried to operate, and I know this government has always tried to operate. It's how I got to know some of the members of the armed forces, was in them seeing both my passion, I think, and my curiosity at wanting to learn more. And so I had the great privilege of being let in. Obviously not know everything that I'm now learning, but I certainly have learned a lot and hope to continue to learn and to continue to act on those lessons as I learn them.
Thank you, Ms. Telford. The opposition today, and particularly the Conservatives, have continued to question why you didn't raise this matter with the Prime Minister. What I'm hearing from you quite clearly is that you and Mr. Marques were told by the clerk that the Privy Council office was the appropriate place for this matter to be looked into further, and that it was not up to politicians or their staff to investigate allegations. Further, you were updated on that process and learned that despite PCO's efforts and attempts, the Ombudsman had not provided the necessary information for PCO to take the matter any further. From there, it was clear that despite further attempts from your office to see what more could be done, PCO had hit a wall. Despite that, you were concerned. You wanted to ensure the individual who had come forward would be safe in their workplace. So in sum, it was clear that this was a matter for PCO. PCO was unable to get any substantial information from the Ombudsman to look into the matter further, and based on the advice you received, there was nothing more that could be done. Is that a fair interpretation of what we've heard today? Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that is, Madam Chair, that is a fair interpretation. And the only thing I would just add to that is because often the comparison or contrast is made to what we've been learning and your committee has been learning about what happened with rumors and anonymous emails and things that came forward under the previous government. And I think it's really important to notice where they are similar and where they are distinct. And where they are distinct is that they had content that was still being followed up on the public service side. That was the appropriate place for the follow-up to happen, as officials have come before you to already say. But they had content to follow up on. We didn't know anything, nor could the public service find out anything that they could follow up on.
Thank you so much, Ms. Telford, and I can imagine, knowing you, how concerning this would have been for you. I know your own feelings were not obviously top of mind, and that despite not knowing the nature of the allegation, that you would have still had the individual who made it front and center in your considerations. I know that those also would have been shared by your staff. Not knowing who the person was or how you could directly reach out and help would have been quite difficult for you. Is that a fair comment?
Well, and even more than that, Madam Chair, knowing nothing I have been in situations where I have received anonymous complaints, or as the previous government did, they received an anonymous complaint, they had a rumor, they had things that they could follow up on and figure out how to wrap their minds around. In this case, we didn't have any information other than that all the appropriate steps were taken to try to follow up, to try to do our best to see if there was anything more we could do to support the person involved, to support whatever outcome they were looking for, depending on what the complaint was. I think all of those steps were taken. But that was the best we could do with what we had, which was very, very little at the time.
All right, thank you. So this last round, we don't have enough time to do a full round. So what I would like to suggest is that the 5-minute rounds get cut down, the 5-minute questions get cut down to 3, and then we leave the 2.5 the where they are. And we're all right with that? Okay, we're on to Madame Alice Lev for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Telford, there is multiple email evidence that shows that the Privy Council office and the Prime Minister's office staff were using sexual harassment, the term sexual harassment. Who made the decision not to tell the Prime Minister?
Madam Chair, I would just remind or clarify 2 things on this point. One is the testimony that has already been referenced by all of the same people that were involved, and more than the number of people that were involved in the emails that I believe the member is referring to, and that none of them, while they thought it was possible, it could be a complaint of a sexual nature. They themselves didn't know the nature of the complaint, and they have all come here and come on the record and said that.
But you didn't know the substance, so you also didn't know that it wasn't. And yet the evidence says the term sexual harassment. So who made the decision not to inform the Prime Minister?
Madam Chair, I know I am repeating myself here, but the member is alleging something that is not the case. And what everyone has said that has come before committee, and what I can only speak, I will only speak also to myself, which is
email evidence.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Point of order.
Go ahead, Mr. Spengeman.
I'm just going to repeat the same point that I repeated previously, and I'm sure my colleague listened to it. It's impossible for interpretation to follow an exchange when a member talks over top of a witness.
Right, thank you, Mr. Spengeman. Go ahead, Madame Alice Lev.
Ms. Telford. Under what authority, what made you think you had the authority to decide not to tell the Prime Minister about these serious allegations against the Chief of the Defence Staff?
I believe, Madam Chair, that the member is now asking what my responsibility in this is. And I can tell you that my responsibility, I believe, was to respond to the request coming from the Minister. As I said earlier in this committee, a request, while this one was particularly unusual and I was concerned about, a request that often comes in from chiefs of staff and ministers, which is how should we react in this circumstance, or what next step should we take, or what's your point of view? And that is the advice that I made sure to get him from the appropriate people in place.
Ms. Telford, there is email evidence saying sexual harassment in nature. Who made the decision not to tell the Prime Minister?
Madam Chair, the member is referring to emails between people who I believe have spoken before this committee. And those same individuals have said that they didn't have any details or any knowledge of the substance of this complaint.
All right, thank you. On to Mr. Baker, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Ms. Telford, for being with us today. I want to thank you for being here today, and I want to express my my sincere disappointment in the Conservative members of this committee and their caucus in their House for their extreme partisanship. Not only that, but they know that the Conservative government and Mr. O'Toole himself followed the exact same process.
Go ahead, Mr. Bazan.
I don't think it's appropriate that Mr. Baker uses his time to attack other members of this committee, especially after they filibustered. It's debate, Madam Chair. It's not a point of order. It's debate. It's very much a point of order because he's besmirching our reputation.
All right, stop, Mr. Bazan.
Is irresponsible. I'd also just say that at the same time,
okay.
those have been using their time to get around questions.
Mr. Bazan, please. Back to Mr. Baker, please.
I'm disappointed to hear that from Mr. Bazan, who's spent the entire time on this committee focusing his time on criticizing others instead of addressing the issue of sexual harassment and assault in the Canadian military. What I was saying was that I want to express my disappointment in the Conservative members of this committee and their caucus in their House for their extreme partisanship. Not only that, but they know that the Conservative government and Mr. O'Toole himself followed the exact same process, except the Conservative government actually appointed General Vance with an active investigation into his conduct was underway. I think that's really important to highlight here. Ms. Telford, I think to wrap it up, I think what I would like to ask you is, you took on a great deal of responsibility when you stepped into the role as Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, but I don't think you probably imagined that you'd get the kind of attention that you have in recent days. But I know you, and I know your values, and I imagine they are likely why you would have decided to come here today to speak to the issues at hand and to help this committee in its work. Ultimately, I believe that it's our committee's responsibility to find a way forward, and I believe we on this committee have an opportunity to provide recommendations so that every woman and man who decides to serve Canadians in the armed forces has the support they need and come forward with the confidence knowing any allegations of sexual misconduct will be taken seriously. As you know, it's no small task. I know Madame Arbour will play a key role and her recommendations will be critical, but I also believe our committee has the opportunity to make a difference. Would you care to comment on that at all or share your thoughts?
A couple of quick thoughts, realizing the time, but I would start by saying this has been an extraordinarily difficult week in an extraordinarily difficult time already. I appreciate where Parliament, what they decided in their vote on Wednesday. And I was pleased to come here. And what has motivated me through this week has been focusing on an issue that I am incredibly passionate about, that I feel extremely strongly about. And I do know that all of you do too. And I know that Parliament does. And I know that if we can all put our collective minds together, that we can truly make the change happen that our Canadian Armed Forces and the women and men in it, some of you here who have served in the Canadian Armed Forces, that you all deserve to see happen. And that is what we need to stay focused on. And we need to stay focused on that before almost anything else, and certainly before partisanship. And I think that has been the most disappointing thing that I have experienced this week as someone who, since I was a little girl, have revered that place up the hill from where I am now. And I really hope we can all focus on what this committee is studying right now, which is sexual misconduct and how we address it in the armed forces.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Monsieur Barcelou-Duval, s'il vous plaît, 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madame Telford, vous avez dit
Ms. Telford, you said in your testimony that you were not aware of the details of the allegations. You did not know they were of a sexual nature, as they were made against General Vance. But it's been established that the reason you did not have those details is because Mr. Sajjan, the Minister of Finance, never wanted to see the details, and unfortunately, it is the same defense minister who did not implement the recommendations of the Deschamps report. Don't you find that at the end of the day, if the minister had acted sooner, we would not be in this situation today? And don't you think that your government ultimately is to blame for the lack of confidence with regard to how the Canadian forces treat women?
Let me try to work backwards through that, Madam Chair. I think this, as I said in my opening statement, and as the member and I have discussed over the course of this committee hearing, this is a systemic problem that dates, or challenge for us all, that dates back to, unfortunately, long before our government came to power. And it is one that our government, as I established with one of the other members, has been trying to tackle since we first got into government. Though, as we also have already established, it is something that we believe much more needs to be done, and much more quickly. But to your point around Minister Sajjan, if I can address that, I just want to say, you know, he was faced with this unusual circumstance, and his first instinct was to seek advice. And the advice that we got from the appropriate officials to give that advice was to redirect the ombudsperson to the Privy Council office. And I don't know what else could have been done.
Madame Telford, vous maintenez que c'est simplement un problème
you're maintaining that it's simply a systemic problem, and I agree, yes, it might be, but there are people, individuals in the system which make decisions, and your government, the Liberal government, had 6 years to implement the recommendations of the Deschamps report. Nothing was done, so don't you think you failed? Don't you think the Liberal government failed to fix this dysfunctional system?
So as I think I already established, Madam Chair, with some of the other members of committee, a lot actually was done in the last 5 years. There were a lot of steps taken, and right across the government, not only as it relates to the Canadian Armed Forces, but specifically also as it relates to the Canadian Armed Forces, specifically as it related to the Deschamps report. Though, as I already said, obviously, and as this committee already knows, not all of it was implemented, and more steps need to be taken as quickly as possible now.
All right, thank you very much. On to Mr. Garrison, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think it's now clear what we've learned at committee, and that is that there was an accusation of sexual misconduct against General Vance. There was no investigation, and there were no consequences for him as a result of that. We've also heard a lot about what happened in the intervening time to try and tackle sexual misconduct in the military. And it's clear that those measures were ineffective, and it may have something to do with the fact that the person in charge had an obvious conflict of interest, because we now know he's been subject to multiple allegations of sexual misconduct. And we have a ministerial system of government here where no one has taken responsibility, either for the failure to investigate General Vance and leaving him in office, or for the general failure to make progress on sexual misconduct in the military. So my question really is, how can we make progress? How can we go forward? How can we give confidence to those who are serving in the military now that sexual misconduct will be taken seriously? If there have been no consequences for the senior military leaders, and no minister has ever taken responsibility.
So I'm going to work maybe forwards through your comments there. I just want to clarify that at the beginning of your comments, you said it has been established that it was a sexual allegation. And I just want to be clear that that was established when there was public reporting in March of 2021. And what the complaint was and all about it. And so some of the other things you said, therefore, were not reflective of things we could act on in between 2018 and 2021. In terms of accountability, I hope that me and the many others who have come before this committee, that is a form of accountability. I hope that the women and men of the armed forces who may be watching this see the commitment from me and my colleagues and from all of you on the actions that we're going to take. And I believe that Parliament has very much been holding us to account, and that the women and men of the armed forces also have the capacity to do that through the systems that are being put in place now.
I want to thank you again, Ms. Telford, for being at committee and your willingness to show up today. And I want to say that I look forward to seeing the signs from this government that this is being treated on an urgent basis, so that, in fact, women, members of the LGBTQ community, and racialized Canadians can all feel that the Canadian Forces is a place they can serve with pride and serve equally. So I thank you for being here today, and I'll conclude my questions there.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. On to the last, Mr. Paulus, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Donc, juste confirmer de façon
just to
finale,
confirm,
Madame Telford,
and to put a final point on this, you said you yourself did not know that there were allegations of sexual harassment against Jonathan Vance in March of 2018, when in fact there is a PCO internal email which states that Minister Sajjan's office received information with regard to these sexual allegations. So you, as the Chief of Staff, are saying that nobody knew these allegations were of a sexual nature when we have an email here to prove it. Yes or no?
As I believe you just said, that is an email from the Privy Council office or within the Privy Council office, and you've had members from the Privy Council office, including the two top officials involved here, come before your committee and confirm to you that they did not know what the nature or the details of the complaint were. We did operate from the beginning, though. We acted quickly and immediately, knowing that that was a possibility. And
Madame Telford,
yes.
Madame Telford, j'ai un courriel
Ms. Telford, I have an email here from Janine Sherman dated March 2, 2018, around 5 p.m.,
qui donne une réponse proposée, qui dit que c'est un cas
proposes
très
an answer
sensible, de
saying
garder ça
it's
de
a
façon
sensitive
très
matter
confidentielle,
which should
et qui
remain
confirme que c'est des
confidential
allégations
and which
d'harcèlement
confirms
sexuel. On parle
that
même pas
these
des
are
conduites, on parle
allegations of a
d'harcèlement.
sexual
Le courriel est
nature.
ici.
We're not
Si
even
vous l'avez
talking
pas, je peux
about
vous
sexual
l'envoyer.
misconduct. We're
Donc,
talking
vous me dites
about something
que
more
même
serious.
après avoir une preuve comme ça, ça
So
peut pas être
even
plus
after
tangible
seeing
que ça.
evidence
Vous
like
me
this,
confirmez que
this is
vous
black and
étiez
white.
au courant
You are
en
still
mars
saying
2018
that
qu'il y
in
avait une
March of
plainte d'harcèlement
2018 you did
sexuel
not
contre
know
Jonathan Vance.
that there was a sexual harassment
Madam Chair, I
complaint
can tell
against
you
Mr.
what I
Vance.
know, as I have tried to do over the course of this committee, and or what I knew at the time, which is obviously different than what I know now. And it's different now because of public reporting. At the time, I knew that there was a complaint. I knew that there was the possibility that it could be this because I didn't know any details about the complaint. Yes, sir.
Donc, vous n'aviez pas le détail, mais
So
vous
you
saviez
did
que c'était
not
une
have
plainte
the
d'harcèlement
details,
sexuel,
but
parce
you
que le
knew
PCO
it
le
was a
savait.
sexual
Vous
harassment
saviez pas c'était
complaint
quoi le
because
détail, bien évidemment,
PCO
mais
knew
vous
it.
saviez que
You
c'était du
didn't know
harcèlement.
the exact details,
Madam
but you knew it
Chair,
was
as
sexual
I've
harassment.
said, apologies if I didn't repeat myself the same way as I did every other time over the course of the committee. I didn't know the nature of the complaint. I did not know the substance of the complaint. I did not know the details of the complaint. I didn't have any info. I didn't know where the complaint came from. I didn't know why it went to the ombudsperson or why the ombudsperson raised it with the minister. I knew very, very little, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mais Michael Vernick le savait parce que
But Michael Wernick knew because he was the clerk of the Privy Council and Ms. Sherman worked for Mr. Wernick.
Thank you. Time is up. Madame Vanderbilt, we've got 2 minutes remaining. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to thank Ms. Telford for being here. I can say that from one feminist to another, your commitment to women, to giving women agency, and to ensuring that they're heard and listened to is something I've personally seen, particularly in the first 3 years of our first mandate when I was the chair of the Women's Caucus, and you always provided the full support of your office to what women are saying. And I just would like you to comment in the last minute that we have about what that means to you, what feminism means, and your own reflections on what has happened here.
Big questions, but I will try to be very, very brief knowing the time. And I would just say it, for me, means in all different forms, us trying to achieve gender equality, and whether it be in the economic, social, or security fields. And it's why we've had meetings across all of those different areas, inside and outside the public service, to see what we could do to provide greater support, to increase the number of women in all of these different fields, including in the security and intelligence areas, and also how to make sure that when they do sign up, when they do put their hand up, that they are provided the supports that they need and deserve so that they can remain, so that they can be empowered, so that they can be promoted, so that another woman can walk in the door behind me. It's a lot, but it's something that I believe reaches far beyond partisanship and is something that we can all work towards and should be a really, really important objective for us all.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Telford, for those inspirational final words. You have our gratitude for your time that you spent with us today, and we wish you very well. You take good care.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Are we good to adjourn, people? It is 3 o'clock. We good? Meeting adjourned.